Hey everyone, as I was editing this video, I realized that I never put a proper spoiler warning at the beginning, so I just want to warn you, all 10 of the movies on this list, there are going to be some spoilers for, so just a fair warning, if you see one that you haven't seen yet, make sure you click off the video, watch it first, and then come back. What's up guys? I know it's been a long time since I've posted anything, especially anything movie related, but as 2022 comes to a close, I did want to make a couple of ranking videos. In this one I'm going to be ranking the top 10 most disappointing films of 2022, in my opinion. I debated whether or not I wanted to do this or do a top 10 worst of the year, but I opted to do this instead because I've seen 90 films this year, actually more than 90 I think. And the movies that wound up at the bottom of my ranking, which you can see on my Letterboxd, link will be in the description. The ones that are at the bottom of my list, they're pretty horrible, and I don't really feel like sitting here talking about movies like The Bubble or Grim Cuddy for 10 minutes straight. So instead, let's take a look at some bigger films that I had higher expectations for, and instead of just being horrible films overall, they just didn't live up to my expectations. That's not to say that some of these aren't really bad movies, but you're not going to see something like Morbius on here because I went into Morbius with low expectations. Was I surprised when it was bad? No, not really. Even as I was going through making this video, I kind of had to revisit these films that I'm talking about and sort of go through the plot synopses again because I sort of forgot what some of them were about because they were so forgettable. But anyways, I'm going to do my best. Let's jump right in with number 10, which is Glass Onion, A Knives Out Mystery. Now this is the one film on the list that I think I would still give a thumbs up to overall. I thought it was an okay little mystery, but when you're following up something like Rian Johnson's first Knives Out, I definitely expected a lot better. I'll start off by pointing out the things that I did like about the film because, again, I would give it a marginally positive score. First of all, Benoit Blanc, played by Daniel Craig, still a ton of fun to watch as he sort of picks up the clues and talks to each of the suspects. Daniel Craig is really good in the movie. I know some people find his southern accent to be a little bit cheesy, and it is, but it works. I still enjoy it. One thing that I forgot to say before I get into this next part is that this video will contain spoilers for all 10 of these movies. I know it's kind of a late notice, but if you haven't seen Glass Onion, I would click off the video, watch it first, and then come back because I'm about to spoil something that's kind of big in the plot. But another thing that I liked in Glass Onion was Janelle Monáe's character and how she actually turned out to be her sister in disguise on this island that Edward Norton has gathered all of these people together, kind of all of your core suspects. And that was a really neat twist about halfway through the movie, and this was the point where I was sort of starting to feel stale with the movie. I was like, ooh, I'm not really liking this. Thankfully, that twist sort of carried it through for me. Unfortunately, for me, the rest of the movie is a lot of mediocrity. The rest of the characters all felt like generic, throwaway, one-dimensional people, whereas in the first Knives Out, I feel like Rian Johnson was able to paint complex characters that did more for the narrative than just act as red herrings for the audience to, keep guessing whether or not they're the killer. There was no one in this movie that felt larger than life to me, and that's fine. I'm sure a lot of people went into this with the expectation that it would be a little bit sillier than the first Knives Out, and if you enjoy it for that, that's fine. But for me, when they got to Edward Norton's character, who is basically this billionaire technology inventor, sort of an Elon Musk type character, but he's portrayed as such an utter idiot.
I've invited you all to my island.
Hi!
Because tonight, a murder will be committed. My murder.
I don't know. It just came off as stupid and silly to me. I mean, you could say that he was just really good at keeping a poker face when everybody pulled up to his island. But for me, it sort of sucked the realism out of the movie, and what's left is just sort of an okay mystery. Coming in at number 9 is Blonde. And this one I debated whether or not it was worth putting on the list because it does have one saving grace for me, and that is Ana de Armas. She is so good in this movie, and it's about 3 hours long, and most of it consists of her sitting there crying or otherwise emoting, and she does a phenomenal job of not only carrying that emotion through, but also she does a fantastic job of embodying what Marilyn Monroe would be acting like in a situation. And another praise that I can throw this movie's way is I do think Andrew Dominik is overall a pretty talented director with some good cinematography ideas and whatnot. There are some ideas that I don't really care for, like the constant shots of a developing fetus, but for the most part, I like a lot of the artistic choices. What really lets this movie down is the story. Now, for one thing, I will say it's okay when you're making a biopic to depict things as not all glossy and perfect. A lot of times when biopics try to portray a culture icon, they try to make their lives look a lot more perfect and pristine than they were. This movie doesn't do that, and I don't mind that to a certain extent, but this takes bleakness and just general unpleasantness to a whole other level. Norma/Marilyn spends about 95% of the movie cowering down, crying, whether that's because of her mother's abuse, a regretful abortion, or sexual assault, all of which are, as you know, very pleasant things. And these things happen on repeat over and over and over again, and it gets to the point where it doesn't feel like it affects the story in any way, and it's just kind of stacking up these events over and over again, and it's not really building towards anything. A lot of people really hyped up the nudity in this movie, and I was actually kind of surprised. I didn't think it was as gratuitous, as explicit as it was going to be, but that just doesn't excuse the general unpleasantness of this movie and the fact that they invented a bunch of fictional story ideas that weren't really factual to Marilyn Monroe's life, or at least weren't proven to be true. I mean, there is a literal scene in this movie where JFK forces himself onto her. That's just disgusting, and quite frankly, it kind of ruined the movie experience if the other things didn't do that already. Overall, this is a movie that I just can't think of anyone who I could go up to and be like, yeah, I'd recommend Blonde to you. I think you would enjoy it. This should have been so much better. Coming in at number 8 is going to be Uncharted. Now, to be fair, I'm not a big fan of the Uncharted game series. I haven't really played any of them, but you don't really have to be a fan of the game series to see that this is a really lousy adaptation. To give credit where due, the movie does actually kind of commit to its absurdity in the third act with a lot of bombastic action sequences where characters survive just the most ridiculous things. If the movie was more like that, I think I would have had a much better time. Unfortunately, the first 2/3, not very good. I actually don't mind Tom Holland as a younger Nathan Drake. I think Tom Holland is an excellent action star that just he has a lot of charisma that he can bring to any role, even if the characterization isn't given much in the writing department. And I think he's no different here. Mark Wahlberg as Sully, on the other hand, God, am I the only one who's kind of tired of Mark Wahlberg just playing himself in movies? He's one of those character actors where he pretty much plays the same person in every role. And I'm getting kind of sick of it. I don't think his personality is good enough to sort of carry a role like this. His usual tendencies and one-liners just got old for me really quick. And you know what else gets really old in this movie? The constant backstabbing. This movie plays with the tropes that I think we're all getting sick and tired of in these heist movies where characters will team up in one moment to achieve a common goal, then they'll betray each other, then they'll hook up again, and it becomes this rinse and repeat cycle that just becomes so tiresome. Most of the supporting characters in this are just bland and boring. I mean, when you have a seasoned actor like Antonio Banderas in your movie and you waste him on this superficial villainous role, it's just, there's a lot of wasted talent here and a lot of wasted potential. As a whole, I don't hate the movie, I just think it's really mediocre, and we need a little bit less mediocrity in Hollywood right now. Coming in at number 7 is going to be Crimes of the Future. I feel like this one might be a little bit controversial because I know a lot of people actually enjoyed this movie. And if you did, all the more power to you. I really love David Cronenberg. I think he was a brilliant director back in the day when he was making things like The Fly. But here, I just found this movie to be a bit superficial. It had a lot of great ideas, couldn't quite execute those ideas as well as I wanted them to. It really sucks because the story of this movie sounds good on paper. When I heard that it takes place in this dystopian future where pain is essentially irrelevant, human bodies are like evolving new organs and all sorts of weird things like that. People are modifying their bodies and cutting each other open because it gives them sexual pleasure. It's like a lot of really weird, oddball, cool science fiction ideas that I feel were just a little bit wasted. I will say that the performances are pretty good. Viggo Mortensen, I guess you could call the protagonist of the movie, plays a character who can basically evolve completely new human organs on a weekly basis, and then he has them surgically excised in sort of like a public display, which is just really bizarre, and it just never really went anywhere for me. Coming in at number 7 is Hellraiser. Now, I want to preface this by saying that I really like David Bruckner as a director. He did The Night House from last year, which I thought was one of the best combinations of horror and drama in the last decade or so. And needless to say, the Hellraiser franchise has sort of turned into cheap fan fiction at this point. So when I heard that he was sort of doing a bit of a reboot from scratch to sort of try to revisit what made Clive Barker's original so good, I was really excited to see how it would turn out. And much like Crimes of the Future, I don't think this is a terrible film by any means. It's very mediocre. The things that I do like about it are the changes to the lore. I think they do a lot of interesting things with the puzzle box here, where it has all these different configurations. And once you solve the puzzle, a blade pops out, cuts you. That's what summons the Cenobites. I thought that was a really interesting way to sort of change the lore without completely starting from scratch. Also, some of the kills are really good. I mean, it's a Hellraiser movie, so a lot of people go into it for the gore and the kills. And while those certainly aren't the focus here, when they're done right. What really frustrated me about this movie is that, number one, I didn't really care about any of the characters, and number two, I feel like the Cenobites were a little bit misused. Let's start with the characters. A lot of them in this movie are just kind of the throwaway secondary characters that need to be there to get killed. The protagonist is a drug addict, and this movie deals with drug addiction a little bit more so than it does lust for someone, as the first Hellraiser did. And I just don't think the themes carry through as well as they did in that first one. Clive Barker's original, it really focused on these weird pleasure and pain sort of blending together weird BDSM shit that I thought was just a lot more interesting. It wasn't really present here at all. And this movie isn't very long either, but I found myself kind of bored at the halfway mark to the point where I was almost dozing off a little bit, which is not something you want when you're watching a horror movie. It should be captivating. That first Hellraiser, I've rewatched it multiple times, and it's awesome. I wish this one was too. Number 5 is going to be Lightyear. Now this one I was really excited for because I love Toy Story. I think the Toy Story franchise is some of the best Pixar has ever done. I don't think that's a controversial opinion at all. And when Lightyear came out, I was surprised to see that it actually got a pretty positive-sided reception. Unfortunately, I thought this was a pretty mediocre film, especially for Pixar standards. I did like the beginning. The first hour or so of the movie was interesting because you have Buzz going on a mission. He winds up failing to rescue his team from this planet that they land on. And so the movie starts out with this really good emotional hook where you feel his failure. You feel the pain associated with that, especially when he begins to do these trial flights to attempt to travel at light speed to get them all out of here. And as he does that, there's this concept of time dilation where, he'll go on a quick flight and 4 years will pass. So eventually his commanding officer dies. And it's actually a really sad moment. It was a great hook for this film. Unfortunately, the rest of it just didn't follow through for me. In a Buzz Lightyear movie, the creatures, the environments, and the characters should be vibrant and exciting. And in this movie, they just felt really drab and colorless. And that was just such a bizarre choice for something that was meant to embody the movie that Andy in Toy Story loved so much that he got the Buzz Lightyear toy and fell in love with it. The group of characters that he eventually teams up with, they were all boring and uninteresting to me. And I thought a lot of the humor in this movie fell flat. I suppose Socks the robotic cat was okay. But man, what they did to Zurg just didn't sit well with me. Number one, because it didn't make a whole lot of sense. When they start getting involved with alternate timelines and stuff, it's really easy to just get lost and convoluted. And I think the writers really did that here. And I also just don't like the idea of Zurg turning out to be an alternate version of Buzz. I think he was working a lot better as his own character. Of course, in Toy Story 2, there's that great moment, the "I am your father," line ripping off Star Wars. But yeah, this movie just didn't have any of the magic that I was hoping it would have. Coming in at number 4 is going to be Don't Worry, Darling. Again, here we have another movie that is mediocre, not terrible, but I know a lot of people were rooting for this to fail from the get-go. I was never in that camp. I know Olivia Wilde has said some really outrageous things that sort of put people in a bad disposition when it comes to this movie. But I was still hoping it would be good. I really like psychological thrillers, and this sort of had a Get Out meets Suspiria type vibe, and that was something that I was really excited for. And you know what? I think the first 2/3 or so of this movie are actually really solid. There are some really great shots. The cinematography overall is incredible. And then you've got a lead actress like Florence Pugh, who of course she's going to deliver. She absolutely does. I see a lot of people hate on Harry Styles in this movie. I don't think he's bad. I don't think he necessarily elevates the material either, but he's fine. Unfortunately, in the third act, this thing just turns into an absolute clusterfuck. It's rushed, it's totally anticlimactic, and again, I'm going to get into some spoilers here, so if you want to see the film first, definitely click off the video. But yeah, it turns out that there's basically this, it messes with virtual reality, sort of like something in the Matrix. And it was a really cool idea. I don't mind the idea at all, even though I know some people thought it was a little too predictable. I don't mind the idea, but it's not explored at all. We don't get enough of an explanation of how this came to be. How did Chris Pine's character become this villainous presence who is helping actual incels essentially imprison women inside of their heads? So yeah, in the end, 2/3 of the movie, pretty good. The final third, pretty bad. And when the movie leaves you on such a sour note with a bad ending, that's sort of what you remember most about it. So unfortunately, this was a bit of a disappointment for me. Kicking off the top 3, we have Amsterdam. This movie was baffling to me. I can't say that I had massive expectations for it, but when you look at this cast list, I mean, you've got Margot Robbie, John David Washington, Christian Bale, Anya Taylor-Joy, Rami Malek, the list just goes on and on. You've got De Niro in there. I expected it to at least be decent, especially since it's from director David O. Russell, Not a very good human being. I'm not sure how he's still getting work, but he makes some pretty great movies. I really like American Hustle and Silver Linings Playbook. And despite all of the talent involved in this movie, so much talent, this thing bored the absolute piss out of me. This movie is about 75% exposition and 25% random actors popping up just so they can have their names plastered onto the poster that add really nothing to the story. De Niro has really just totally phoned it in here. I haven't seen him do that much either, which is a real disappointment. Some of the actors here are at least trying. I mean, Christian Bale, he always brings the energy. But even his character, I found to just be excruciatingly boring. And I don't understand how they screwed it up this bad, because the concept of it isn't too bad. I mean, you've got these three characters who meet up in Amsterdam after World War I and sort of become this quirky group of close-knit friends. And they wind up uncovering this mysterious plot of fascism and Nazis, and quite frankly, the sad thing is I saw this on October 9th, and that's still all I remember from it. I really don't remember much from the third act of this movie because it was so forgettable. There are plenty of throwaway jokes here that just fell completely flat for me. And I don't know. I don't know what else to say other than this movie bored me to death. And that should not happen when you have this cast, when you have this level of talent behind and in front of the camera. This is one of the few films on this list that would have actually made my top 10 worst of the year had I made that video. So yeah, I do think this movie is pretty awful. Number 2 is Thor: Love and Thunder. I will say that I've mostly enjoyed Phase 4 of Marvel so far. I know a lot of people have gripes with it. It doesn't exactly form the most cohesive whole, but each individual movie on its own, I feel like I've enjoyed at least somewhat for some of the elements that they bring to the MCU. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness brought a little Sam Raimi horror into the mix. This movie, it takes the humor in Ragnarok, because I actually still really love Thor Ragnarok. I think Taika Waititi injected a lot of new fun and joy into the character of Thor, which was much needed. And here he just goes way too over the top with the humor. And here's the thing, Ragnarok had a lot of humor too, but you know what it had in addition to that humor? It had a lot of heart. It had characters that I enjoyed and cared about, and characters that had actual arcs through the movie. This thing, on the other hand, borders on self-parody at numerous points. Screaming goats? Sure, let's do it about 20 times and see how many times we can get the audience to roll their eyes. A love triangle between Thor, Mjolnir, and Stormbreaker? Which are both inanimate objects, by the way. Sure, why not? It's things like that that are constantly just recycled over and over and over again, and they often get in the way of dramatic scenes that actually could have some weight to them. I was especially excited to see what they would do with Russell Crowe as Zeus, but even he gets reduced to just an endless conveyor belt of horribly unfunny jokes. Seriously. I don't know what Taika Waititi's obsession is with orgies, but he likes to make orgy jokes in just about every single movie that he's made. Christian Bale as Gore the God Butcher is easily the best thing in this movie, but he feels like he's in a different project. Like his head's just totally in a completely different game, because every time he shows up, it's dark, it's actually kind of terrifying, and then he disappears and it's right back to the usual garbage jokes. Another thing that just bugged the shit out of me in this movie is that the central story revolves around Gore wanting to kill all of the gods because he doesn't think that they have enough respect for their disciples and that they're not worth worshipping. And the movie kind of makes you side with Gore in a way, because every single god that we're shown in this movie acts like a complete buffoon, whether it's the guy at the beginning that Gore kills, or Zeus himself. Like, these people, these deities, whatever they are not worth saving. I don't know, that's just something that I picked up on that sort of compromised the entire movie for me. They also try to do the whole Jane Foster as Thor, Lady Thor, which I know is a big arc in the comic series. I don't read the comics. I was sort of hoping it would be well executed. Thankfully, they didn't go the route where, they're bringing Jane into Thor's shoes so that if Chris Hemsworth retires, they'll have somebody to replace him. Thankfully, they didn't go that route, but I don't think what they did made enough sense, and I don't think it was as emotionally poignant as it should have been, especially when you get to the ending there where she actually does die. It really should have hit a lot harder than it did. I don't know. This one was just a mess. I would still be excited to see a fifth Thor movie if they do go that route. But, I don't know, I think Taika Waititi needs to scale back on the humor, and maybe the studio needs to oversee him a little bit more. But coming in at number 1, the most disappointing movie of the year for me. Again, not the worst movie of the year. I've seen some shit this year, trust me. But that's Jurassic World Dominion. Now, I love Jurassic Park. It is one of my favorite movies of all time. And Jurassic World, I know a lot of people hate that movie too, all 3 of these Jurassic World movies. I think the first one's fine. It's a big monster movie with CGI. There's hardly any practical effects in that movie. That's fine. It's entertaining. It gives you a lot of fan service with the open Jurassic World actual theme park. but we have come a long way since then, that's for sure. And the trailers, to my surprise, actually made this movie look decent. Whoever edited the trailer deserves a raise, because I was sold on it. I mean, you've got Sam Neill, Laura Dern, and Jeff Goldblum returning for the first time all together on the big screen.
Ellie Sattler.
Alan Grant.
You got dinosaurs loose throughout the world. It's all about how can humanity learn to coexist with these prehistoric creatures. And then the movie comes out and there's hardly any dinosaurs in it. Okay, that might be a little bit of an exaggeration, but the real plot of this movie is that there's this company out there, Biosyn, and they're genetically modifying locusts to take out the entire crop supply so that they can dominate the feed industry. I'll never understand why they try to go to such a large scale with these movies. All you gotta do is get people on the ground, you gotta have dinosaurs chasing them and eating them, and you have me sold. But this movie has hardly any of that. I mean, it does have some more practical effects than the previous Jurassic World films, which I totally respect, but the script here is just totally brain dead. The old characters are given essentially nothing to do. I mean, the dialogue in this movie at times is atrocious. It kind of feels like this is a first-time screenwriter in Colin Trevorrow. Now, I've never been a huge fan of his work anyways, but man, I just wish that somebody else was given the reins for this franchise, because I do think this movie could have been good. The trailers painted a picture in my head of what this movie could have been. Unfortunately, we just didn't get that. Instead, we get Chris Pratt riding his motorcycle around being chased by CGI raptors, literally jumping into a plane that's moving on said motorcycle. You've got the locust thing. You've got Dr. Grant, Sam Neill, does absolutely nothing in this movie. He's there solely for the nostalgia. All of them are, really. The third act of this movie does kind of commit to the monster movie madness that the first Jurassic World was. I mean, you've got the Giganotosaurus and the T-Rex fighting, but it's all just done in such a dumb, silly, cheesy way. It really feels like the third act of a superhero movie, which Jurassic Park just shouldn't be, man. These movies have turned into essentially something that has been shoved into the Marvel formula and crapped out as, well, Jurassic World Dominion. So there you have it, guys. Those are my top 10 most disappointing movies of the year. I know this is kind of a negative video for the first one back in a long time, but I do plan on doing a top 15 or maybe even top 20 of the year, because again, I've seen 90 of them, and I want to give praise to as many good movies as I can. I don't think this year's been as great as it was for last year. I think 2021 was a stellar year for cinema. But yeah, I have plans to make more videos in the next couple of weeks just talking about the movies that I watched this year. If you clicked on this video, hell, even if you're just still subscribed to me, thank you. I don't know why you've stuck around this long since I've been absent, but I'm back. I plan to stay back. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like. Go into the comments, let me know what your most disappointing movie of the year was, and I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.